There is a version of the classic rock era that most people carry around with them. It sounds like open highways and front-seat radios, and the particular kind of hope that only exists when you're young enough to believe the world can actually be remade. It said things out loud that entire generations hadn't been able to say quietly. It was defiant and generous and occasionally transcendent. And it is still, 50 years later, the soundtrack people reach for when they need to feel something they can't quite name. That version is true, and it is not the whole story. The whole story includes a plane that ran out of fuel over Mississippi 3 days after its passengers released what would become their greatest album. It includes a Welsh songwriter found in his garage at 27, his girlfriend pregnant with a daughter he would never meet, because his manager stole the money, and the lawyers couldn't help, and the phone calls were never returned. It includes a drummer found dead in a bedroom at 32, a North American tour fully booked and ready, a night that started badly and ended the way those nights sometimes do. These are not aberrations, they are the pattern. 10 bands that built something extraordinary and were destroyed, or destroyed themselves, or were destroyed by the industry around them at the exact moment they had made it. This is what the era looked like from the inside.
Between 1969 and 1971, Creedence Clearwater Revival produced 14 consecutive top 10 singles. Every one was written by John Fogerty. That fact is also the reason the band no longer exists. His bandmates resented the imbalance. When they demanded equal songwriting on the final album, Fogerty relented. The result was Mardi Gras, which Rolling Stone called the worst album ever released by a major rock band. The band dissolved 5 months later. Fogerty had signed his publishing rights away at 23 and spent the next 15 years refusing to perform his own songs rather than enrich the label that owned them. In 1988, that label sued him for plagiarizing himself. He won. He and his brother Tom were barely speaking when Tom died in 1990. At the funeral, John said, "We wanted to grow up and be musicians. I guess we achieved half of that." 4 people, 6 consecutive top 10 singles between 1966 and 1967. Underneath it, from the beginning, a tangle of affairs and marriages that success pulled tighter rather than looser. John Phillips, his wife Michelle, Denny Doherty, and Cass Elliot, 3 of whom were romantically entangled with each other in various combinations throughout the band's entire existence. Michelle later called it 2.5 years of total melodrama. By 1968, Phillips' drug use and the collapsed relationships had made the recording studio a war zone. The breakup came in early 1969. Cass Elliot built a solo career and was mid-run of a sold-out engagement at the London Palladium when she died of heart failure in 1974 at 32. For decades, the press reported she choked on a ham sandwich. She hadn't. The rumor outlasted most of her chart positions and said more about how the industry processed a woman of her size and intelligence than anything she ever recorded.
Eric Clapton hid his own name on the back cover. Lila and other assorted love songs did not chart in the UK. The band dissolved mid-sessions for a second album. Clapton vanished into heroin for 3 years. None of that is the remarkable part. Producer Tom Dowd took Clapton to an Allman Brothers show during the sessions. Clapton heard Duane Allman from half a mile away and invited him back to the studio. Allman played on 11 of the album's 14 tracks and came up with the guitar figure that defines Lila itself. He died in a motorcycle accident in October 1971 at 24, before the album became a classic. The re-released single reached the top 10 in 1972. Allman never knew. Drummer Jim Gordon co-wrote the piano coda that transforms the song into something else entirely. In 1983, he murdered his mother. He was institutionalized and died there in 2023. Clapton said years later, "We were a make-believe band.
We were all hiding inside it. Robbie Robertson did not wait for the end. He organized it. On Thanksgiving Day, 1976, the band played their farewell concert at the Winterland Ballroom. 5,400 people, Scorsese behind the cameras, Dylan and Mitchell and Muddy Waters on the stage. The other members did not all agree it was time. Levon Helm never forgave him. The argument was about songwriting credits. Helm believed he was owed. It ran to the end of both their lives. Robertson's private reason for ending the tour, expressed more plainly in later years, was that he was watching his bandmates destroy themselves. He was right. Richard Manuel died by suicide in 1986. Rick Danko died of heart failure at 56 in 1999. Helm died in 2012, still publicly angry. Robertson was the only person in that building who seems to have understood it was already ending, whether he staged the exit or not.
Buffalo Springfield existed for 2 years. Stephen Stills and Neil Young were both 22, both already writing beyond what the band could contain. By the final album, the split was so complete that producer Jim Messina assembled Last Time Around from sessions the two guitarists recorded weeks apart. The band played their last show before it reached the shelves. The title was more than a name. It was a diagnosis. Everything Buffalo Springfield built was inherited by bands who did what Springfield couldn't sustain. Young built one of the longest careers in the history of the music. Stills went to Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. The Eagles took the sound to stadiums. None of it could have happened inside the original group. The Container lasted 2 years. What came out of the wreckage lasted 50. Street Survivors was released October 17, 1977. The cover showed the band standing in flames. It went gold in 10 days. 3 days later, they boarded a Convair CV-240 charter flight from Greenville to Baton Rouge. Earlier that year, Aerosmith's crew had inspected the same plane. They watched the pilots pass a bottle of Jack Daniels between them during the walkthrough and passed on the aircraft. Skynyrd, newer to the level of success that required a private plane, took what was available. The aircraft ran out of fuel over Mississippi and went down in a swamp. Van Zandt was killed. Steve Gaines was killed. His sister Cassie, who had reportedly begged not to board after a frightening engine flare the previous day, was killed. Both pilots were killed. The NTSB ruled crew inattention. MCA pulled the flaming cover and replaced it with plain black. Street Survivors went platinum anyway. Who Are You was released in August 1978. On the album cover, Keith Moon sits in a chair. Stenciled across the back in block letters, "Not to be taken away." It was a leftover prop from a film shoot. Nobody read it as anything other than a joke. 3 weeks after the album's release, Moon was found dead in his flat. He was 32. The cause was an accidental overdose of hymenevrin, a sedative prescribed to help him manage alcohol withdrawal. He had taken 32 tablets. The recommended dose was 1. Moon had been making a genuine effort. The drug that killed him was the drug prescribed to keep him alive long enough to get there. The Who continued. They always continued. But the band that made Who's Next and Quadrophenia required all 4 of them. What the industry handed Moon at 21, it provided nothing to manage. The prescription was an attempt to repair a decade of damage in a single bottle. On September 24, 1980, John Bonham was picked up for rehearsals at Bray Studios. The North American tour was scheduled to begin October 17th. Every date was sold. Over the course of that day, Bonham drank approximately 40 measures of vodka. He was put to bed at Jimmy Page's house that evening. He was found dead the following afternoon. He was 32.
10 weeks later, the surviving members issued a statement. It read, "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were." It was signed Led Zeppelin. The tour was canceled, every sold-out date. The biggest rock band in the world walked away from it rather than continue as something other than what they were.
And Paul McCartney, if you are listening, Adrienne from Brooklyn loves you with all her heart.
Paul McCartney was 19 when he signed his first management contract with Brian Epstein in 1962. Lennon was 21. Harrison was 18. None of them had legal representation. Nobody required them to. By 1969, the Northern Songs catalog, which owned the Lennon-McCartney songwriting legacy, had been sold to a television executive after Lennon and McCartney were outbid for the controlling stake. They held 30% between them. The rest was gone. Michael Jackson later bought it. The Beatles never got it back. The Let It Be sessions were meant to be a return to simplicity. What the cameras captured instead was 4 people running out of the ability to be in the same room. McCartney sued his bandmates in 1970 to dissolve the partnership. The litigation ran until 1989. The industry that made them the most famous musicians in history provided no mechanism to exit it cleanly. Nobody was required to build one. Nobody did. Pete Ham co-wrote Without You at 23. Harry Nilsson took it to #1 in 1972. Mariah Carey took it to #1 again in 1994. Over 180 artists have covered it. Ham never saw any of it coming. By the time it arrived, he was already gone. Badfinger were the first band signed to Apple Records. They had hits, they had talent, and in 1970 they hired a manager named Stan Poley, who understood the industry in ways 4 young musicians from Wales didn't. A financial statement covering their first full operating year showed the 4 members combined earned $27,000. Poley earned $75,000 in commission alone. When Warner Bros. Advanced the band money for a new deal, Poley set up an escrow account for the funds. The account was emptied. Warner pulled the band's album mid-release. It had been selling 25,000 copies a week. The band's income stopped. Ham called Poley repeatedly. Poley never answered. On the morning of April 24, 1975, Pete Ham hanged himself in the garage of his home. He was 27, 3 days short of his birthday. His girlfriend was pregnant. He left a note. At the bottom, he added a postscript. It read, "Stan Poley is a soulless bastard. I will take him with me." Ham's daughter was born 1 month later. Tom Evans, who co-wrote Without You, who had driven Ham home at 3 in the morning, not knowing what the morning would bring, died by suicide in 1983, still fighting over royalties from the same song. Poley was convicted of fraud in 1991. He received probation. He never paid the ordered restitution. He died in California in 2009 at 87. He outlived Pete Ham by 34 years and Tom Evans by 26. Without You is still on the radio. Every day, somewhere, it's on the radio.
The classic rock era didn't end. The songs are everywhere. The catalogs still generate revenue for labels and publishers and estates, some controlled by the families of people who were cheated, some by the companies that did the cheating. What ended were the people. With a consistency nobody at the time seemed to find alarming, the industry that built the era consumed it. Young people handed enormous contracts they didn't understand, fame they had no infrastructure to manage, pressure with nothing to absorb it. When it went wrong, and it went wrong over and over in the same ways, the story told was weakness, ego, excess, rock and roll. The other story was always there, the one about contracts signed at 19, managers who stole everything and received probation, planes that failed inspections and got chartered anyway.
It just required looking at who benefited from the version that blamed the artists. The music is still beautiful. It always will be. That's the part nobody had to protect.